today. Thank y'all for coming. I'm glad you're part of our worship time today. I was looking for a purple shirt. I've been looking for one. I didn't want pink. I already had pink. I wanted purple. So I've been looking. I could never find one in a store. No offense to anybody in retail in here. Walmart didn't have one. So anyway, I ordered it on Amazon. So here it is. For my birthday, I want to preach on one of my favorite passages this morning. Have y'all began to look for that? Romans 8, 28 through 30. I think you'll find this very familiar. Romans 8, 28 through 30. Y'all got it? Go ahead and stand with me. Let's read this together. Romans 8, 28 through 30. I'll be reading from the NIV, just for the clarity. This, of course, is Paul writing to the church at Rome, and of course to Christians everywhere. And we know that in all things God works. What happened to me? Let me try that again. And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love Him, who have been called according to His purpose. For those God foreknew, He also predestined to be conformed to the image of His Son, that He might be the firstborn among many brothers and sisters. And those He predestined, He also called. And those He called, He also justified. Those He justified, He also glorified. God's people said, Amen. Thank you. Please be seated. Very familiar passage then, that God works in all things, that in all things God works for good for those who love Him and are called according to His purpose. Let's talk about what it doesn't say first. It doesn't say that everything will feel good all the time for everyone. That's just not what it said at all. It said that in all things God works for good. Now, there's a catch here. It doesn't say for everybody. It says for those who love Him. Okay, so let's just understand this as we proceed. These are His children. These are the ones that have been called according to His purpose. Now, His purpose for everyone is to be saved. And He's predestined us to be like Christ. And what He does is He uses the things that happen in our lives to conform us to the image of Christ. Now, He's not conforming lost people to the image of Christ. He's conforming His children. Remember, notice what He said, that Jesus might be a firstborn among many brothers and sisters. He's turning us, His children, to look more and more like Christ. That's your goal as a person. That's your goal as a believer, is to look more and more like Jesus every day. That should be the direction that we're going. Now let me kind of catch us up on what we've talked about the last couple of weeks, because we've got to look at things in the proper perspective. And I'm doing this because I'm saying we've got to kind of turn around some of our thinking. It's not us living our lives and then we ask God for help when we need Him. God is not an ambulance driver who rushes in when we make the call. Remember, I've said that before. God is not an ambulance driver who rushes in when we make the call. Something happens, oh God. We start to call out to Him and here He comes. No, God is not an ambulance driver. He is a surgeon who wounds us on purpose. See, God's always up to something good, and God's always doing something good, and God takes the broken road of our lives and takes us somewhere. You're in here, we're all in here together this morning, and we have all come through different paths, different roads. Some of us have taken some detours. And some of us have been slowed down in our lives and have come to a halt and fallen over in the ditch perhaps. But yet here we are. Here we are at this moment in time. And God has brought us here. And it's not just that we're living our lives and we call out to God because we need help and He's an ambulance driver who comes in and rescues us. No, God is a surgeon, and you are created for Him. Remember, I've been talking about that. That it's not that we're born and we live our lives and if we need God, we holler out to Him. No, the opposite is true. God is God. He created us for His pleasure. Remember, all things are by Him, through Him, and for Him. And not only that, so I'm living for God. I'm here at His pleasure. This air that's in my lungs right now belongs to Him. This heart that's beating in my chest is His. It belongs to Him. The life in my body belongs to God. He's the author of life. We just sang about that. Earlier I said that He carved your name in the palm of His hand. That's such a remarkable passage from Isaiah 49. I just love that He carved your name in the palm of my hand. But then last Sunday I took it a little closer. See, that's the Old Testament. It gets even better in the New Testament, doesn't it? And Jesus came along and offered eternal life. No one had ever heard that before. And so not only did God carve my name in the palm of His hand, but then we come along last Sunday. I'm going to use my right hand. And last Sunday we found that's where I live. I live in His hand. Jesus said that we are in, Jesus said this in John chapter 10, that we're in His Father's hand and no one can snatch them out of His hand. And then He went on to say, they're in my hand because I and the Father are one, and no one can snatch them out of my hand. And so what I'm getting at, and this is kind of where I've been driving at this summer. This is kind of where my heart is this summer. I've been working on this. Jody will tell you, every day I've been working on this. I'm living in God's hand, and anything that happens to me, I want you to never forget that I'm saying this. Anything that ever happens to you happens right under God's nose. Because you're right here. You're right here. And anything that ever happens to you right under His nose. Now, you think He's going to let something happen to you that He doesn't want to happen? You think He's powerful enough to protect you? You bet He is. Now, this is our sovereign God. We talked about this last Sunday. He gave up some of His sovereignty so that you can have a free will. Because you chose to live here. See, everybody's God's creation, but not everybody's God's child. It's when we believe. It's when we become a believer. This passage is for believers. It's for those who love Him and have been called according to His purpose. Well, what does that mean? It means we're living in His will. We're doing what He wants. We realize that we live for His pleasure and that our lives are for Him, that He owns us. Not only did He create me, not only did He give me life, He sustains my life too. Now, He didn't just take me home when I got saved. He left me here because He's got a job for me to do. And if you're living and breathing in this room this morning, God has a job for you to do. Now, what that is, that's between you and God. That's for you to figure out. Paul said, work it out. Work it out. Work out your salvation with fear and trembling. Work it out. But I know this, the fact that you're sitting in this room this morning is encouragement to me. I know that. But I know it goes way deeper than that and way beyond that. But I know that we're here as a family together this morning. We're praying for each other. And I know you may not be the world's greatest spokesman or writer or singer or songwriter, but I know you can pray. I know you can pray for the requests that we've had this morning. Isn't it neat that we have city councilmen represented right here? That just makes me feel so good. You can pray for our city. It looks to me like they've got some decisions to make. And you know, I'm just going to tell you guys, I trust you. I know you're praying. I know folks are praying for you. I know you guys are wise. I feel good about it. You guys are going to do the right thing. But how does God work all things for good? You know, some things are so painful. I've said this before. I took my children down to Dr. Ross, and I watched his nurse give them a shot, Savannah. And I watched her cry, and I let them do it. God's not an ambulance driver. He's a surgeon. He knows what he's doing. He's always up to something good. Isn't it interesting that twice this morning someone has said, God doesn't make mistakes? He doesn't. He doesn't create mistakes either. He doesn't make mistakes. He's always up to something good. He can turn the bad things into good. Now, I put a chess board on the screens this morning for a reason. That's on purpose. Because God is a master chess player. And how he can take the pieces and make that all work, it's an absolute miracle that he can do that. You know, Einstein was right. Einstein said there's two ways to live your life, and only two. This is Einstein we're talking about this morning. He said there's only two ways to live your life. One is as nothing is a miracle, and the other is as though everything is a miracle. How do you choose to live your life? You believe it's all just random chance, and that something random can happen to you on any given day? Or do you believe that God is in control? He's moving those chess pieces. And you know, how many of y'all have played chess? Some of y'all, I mean, if you give up a pawn or two, you're not too concerned about that, right? I mean, some things are going to happen to us that are painful, but they're not devastating. Because his mercies are new every morning. Great is thy faithfulness, Jeremiah said. And so some things happen. And this passage doesn't mean that God is micromanaging your every move. It just doesn't. Because you're not a puppet on a string and God's working the strings. No, you're not his puppet. And you're not his pet. And you're not his toy. You're his child. And so he's given you a free will. Now this is my opinion. This is kind of where I've concluded on this matter. That he's built a hedge around us. You know, remember, I'll back this up scripturally. Remember Psalm 139 says that you go before me and you follow behind me. You surround me. Where can I go from your spirit? Remember that? And so I believe that God has built a hedge around us and we're free inside there. But there are certain boundaries that he has set. And I believe, now this is my opinion, that your life is in God's hands, not your own. Because he's the one that has the say. He's the one that knows your final day. He knows the day you were born. He knows the day you're going to die. You climb up on the roof and jump off, he's going to let you and he's not going to catch you. And if you break your leg, you break your leg. But I don't think you're going to die unless that's God's plan. Now, I said that that's my opinion. I'm still working through this. Because God doesn't micromanage every move I make. If he did, I'd just be a puppet. But he's given me a free will. So we can trip and stumble. And we can take detours on that race that's been set before us. But he's using, in his sovereignty, he's using everything to take you somewhere. And where is it that he's taking you? To be like Christ. That's his goal. It's neat for me to look at all of you out here and think about the road that you've traveled that brought you here this morning. And God is using that. You know, y'all probably know this song from Rascal Flatts. Y'all know what I'm about to say, right? God used the broken road. God blessed the broken road that led me straight to you. You know, the Rascal Flatts didn't write that song. Doug's the only person that might possibly know. It was actually the Nitty Gritty Dirt Band wrote it first. I didn't know that till I looked this up. We all know it from Rascal Flatts. God blessed the broken road that led me straight to you. Now that's a romantic song. But I'm saying, and what I think that Paul is saying, is that God can bless your broken road. You've made detours. You've stumbled and fallen. But God is at work. And He can take good and bad, all things, and work them to get you where He's taking you. He's not through with you. If He was, He would have just taken you to heaven when you became a believer. He's left you here. He's got a plan for you. And it's ultimately good. I've played chess before when I lost nearly every man on the board, including the queen, which is the most powerful, but still won the game. Still won the game. And we're going to win the game. If we're believers, we're going to win the game. Because ultimately, He takes everything and He turns it to good. You know, I referred to this last week. I know I'm repeating myself again, and I know Dr. Luce taught on Joseph a couple of weeks ago. Remember what he told his brothers? He said, "You intended to harm me, but God used that for good." See, that's how powerful God is. That's what God can do in His sovereignty. Everything that happens, God can use that for good, and God has a purpose. I want to talk about another man this morning. The blind man in John chapter 9. The disciples assumed that somebody had to sin. See, they believed basically in karma. And they believed that somebody had to sin that this man was born blind. And Jesus said, nobody sinned that made him be born blind. He was born blind so that the glory of God might be revealed in his life. And then Jesus healed him and showed His power. It might be that some of the things that we go through, they're painful to us, but they glorify God. They bring Him glory. And maybe someone will see that needs to see that. How you reacted to it, how other people reacted, how God sustained you, how He brought you through. And God, if God gets the glory from our lives, then we're fulfilling our purpose. But again, nothing's going to happen to you that doesn't happen to you right under His nose, because you're in the palm of His hand. You're safe right there. And it says that those that He foreknew, He also predestined to be conformed. Now don't get tripped up on that word predestined there, because all it means is His plan all along. He beforehand destined that you be conformed to the image of Christ. That's the predestination, is that you look like Christ. He says those He predestined, He called. Well, the Bible teaches that God called us all. For God so loved the world. And Jesus said, I would that none should perish. So He's called us all. But remember the wedding banquet? The king sent the invitation out and everybody came in. And then that story takes this amazing twist. The king's walking through there and he sees a guy who's not wearing the proper clothing and he casts him out. And Jesus said this, He said, you see, many are called, but few are chosen. Remember, the difference was the man was not wearing the righteousness that Jesus gives. So we can't say yes to God and think we're going to enter into His party without saying yes to Jesus, because He's the one that clothes us in righteousness. And so we love God, we're called, and as soon as we're called and as soon as we say yes to Him, He justifies us, and that means it's just as if I'd never sinned. Justified, never sinned. He forgives us of our sin. He cleanses us from unrighteousness. He puts His robe on us. And then He says this, and He says, and those He predestined, He called. Those He called, He justified. Those He justified, He glorified. Now we're getting there. This is what God's plan is for you, is to look like Christ and be glorified. So this passage is a wonderful passage, and it's a wonderful promise for believers. For those who love God, those who have accepted His gift of salvation. And when we have, we can know that God is at work in everything. Some things are painful, and we've talked about that. Why pain might be good for us. I talked about letting my children get shots because I knew it was good for them. And that God is a surgeon. He knows what He's doing. See, pain brings perseverance. Pain builds our faith. Pain matures us. Jesus was familiar with suffering. Isaiah 53 tells us that the Messiah is going to be familiar with suffering. If we're going to be like Jesus, we're going to be familiar with suffering. Aren't you glad the Bible doesn't say that if you become a believer, you will never feel pain again? If the Bible said that, we'd have to throw it out, because it's just not the experience that any of us have ever had. But the Bible is true, and it tells us that there's going to be some suffering, there's going to be some pain, but it's all going to happen right under God's nose. You're here for His pleasure. You belong to Him. He's your dad, and you can ask Him. And when you have an issue, you can say, God, what are you going to do about it? I know I've said that a lot this summer, because we got to start living it, and I'll quit saying it. God, what are you going to do about it? I'm yours. I'm here for your pleasure. I'm here in your hand. How are you going to handle the things that happen? God can bless the broken road and lead you to Christ on it and make you more like Christ, make you mature, give you a purpose, give you peace. He can use you so that those around you see His goodness and see Him. Stand with me this morning and let's pray together. Thanks again, everybody, for coming today.